Age of Empires IV has just finished its open stress test weekend. 4 days of pure AoE goodness. Some responses have been good, some less so, but all in all it's been a massive release to push forward and bring more eyes back to the grandfather of strategy games. But from what we've been shown so far, from what has been played during this initial showcase, I came away with one phrase in the forefront of my mind. One thought that in my opinion just sums up Age of Empires IV at this point in time. It truly feels like a basic masterpiece. This video is brought to you by V Rising. Awaken as a weakened vampire after centuries of slumber. Hunt for blood in nearby settlements to regain your strength whilst hiding from the searching sun to survive. V Rising is a vampire survival simulation. A vast open world that can be explored solo or with friends. Raiding bandit camps, traversing terrible terrain or encountering other supernatural beings. Build and customize your castle to your will as a base to convert humans to your loyal servants in a quest to raise your vampire empire to the max. But be aware, the sun is rising and will turn you to ashes if you aren't careful. Not only can you become the Lord of the Night in V Rising, but also you can take down other players, raiding their castles and their progression through the game, or even become a diplomat. Convince them to join your ways, depending if you prefer the use of steel or silver tongues to gain an advantage in this terrifying world. Click the link in the description to check out V Rising right now and see if it is your destiny to become the next Dracula. This stress test was an interesting one. The whole point was to get as many players on the game as possible to presumably see how it handles it. Of course, the main focus would be around the multiplayer, seeing how the network holds up and so players could find each other through their new matchmaking system or just play with their friends. With the free test, we're able to get our hands on 1v1, 2v2 and so on when it came to multiplayer matches, but of course there was also co-op with friends where you could team up and try and beat the new AI that has been put into the game. This is what I normally do really. I'm not massively into the single player. As a casual Age of Empires fan, I do have thousands of hours between all the games put together, but most of this is just testing tactics and different factions against AI opponents on my own or with co-op partners. Additionally, we do get access to the opening tutorial mission as well that gives a good indicator of the new direction this title would be going. Unfortunately, the tutorial mission though was about as far as we got when it comes to single player content. The massively hyped campaigns that Relic are telling us that should come to the game are nowhere to be seen at this point. However, I do think we can let them off with this one since multiplayer was the stress test's focus. So, is it any good? I did make a video talking about the strange and weird promotional material that Microsoft and Relic were releasing on the run-up to AoE IV. I had heard feedback from people that managed to get into the earlier closed beta testing phases that it was actually a good game, that most of it was positive. Of course, there were issues that needed sorting, and many have said that this stress test at the weekend was a massive improvement. However, despite the positive feedback, Microsoft just weren't really showing that in their trailers. We got very little actual gameplay, very little real info. You could tell people were kind of starting to lose hope. The initial announcement shows some pretty cartoony graphics that Relic were aiming towards, yet I think they've actually toned it down a little bit for the most recent version. So, what did we get to play around? Well, I love the new grouping mechanics in the game. Being able to take multiple units, hitting control and then a number on your keypad, putting those units into their own group. So then hitting that select number will highlight all the troops you added to said group later on in the game. Of course, clicking and dragging is still there, and the quicker double clicking on a unit to select all visible troops of that same unit is still in the game. But this grouping mechanic means that you can mix and match way faster. Maybe have some archers and infantry in the same unit if you want to play aggressively, or give cavalry some artillery support if that's more your thing. The great thing about this is you can select your troops and groups even if the specific units that you want aren't on your screen at the time. Perhaps you're viewing an enemy base from afar, now you're instantly able to send up the right troops for the job without having to go all the way back to your base to manually select them. The new game also has an ambush mechanic that lets you hide troops in forests for the select moment for them to jump out and take out the enemy using guerrilla tactics. It's a pretty cool addition, and it's nice to see some new actual real gameplay mechanics added in, yet I can't see it being all that useful during multiplayer games using the main playstyle of AoE. Furthermore, heading from one age to the next uses landmarks now. These can give you buffs. For example, if you build a cathedral, sometimes it can generate faster gold, or maybe you build one of the keeps that gives you more defensive capabilities. Every time that you want to move to the next age, be it feudal, castle, or imperial, you get the choice of 2 pathways, meaning that there's a great variety always there, which landmark you want to choose. These landmarks are also tied to the faction, creating some great changes in playstyle. The Holy Roman Empire have different to the British, who also have different to the Chinese. So the difference between cultures is even more so than just the troops and buffs that you get within them. The main feeling that I came away from playing this stress test is it's great, but it's great because it's Age of Empires. And boy, does it really feel like an Age of Empires game. But I'll make a little bit more sense of that later. But what did the community as a whole think? Well, overall, it's been incredibly positive. As mentioned, there have been testing for the game all the way back to nearly 2 years ago from this point. And the lucky ones that got the chance to play it back then have said that they love how the title has come along to the point it is now, with massive changes to aesthetics, animations, and somewhat to the gameplay. Currently, the UI has seen as the main sticking point for a lot of people. Let's be honest, it's kind of ugly. It looks like a Unity game with your basic color gradient background and looks way too modern for the setting that it's currently in. I mean, come on, where are the burnt scrolls and intricate wreath designs of Age of Empires 2? That looked awesome and fit perfectly for the time period. Something along those lines would complement the experience way more than what the current version of Age of Empires 4 has to offer. At this point in the game, there's very little in terms of actual faction information. Of course, every culture has their advantages and disadvantages for each playstyle, but that's kind of hard for the casual player to decipher on a surface level. I think this may just be down to the bare bones version of the game that we got during the stress test, but it's something worth mentioning if you really want to delve deep into each faction and what they're good at. One other big point I see coming up time and time again, and something that I and James noticed during our co-op game we played, is the camera. It's way too close. Everything feels so zoomed in, and especially when you've got these bigger units like the naval vessels and the massive castle walls, everything seems to fill up way more of the screen, giving much less ability to move around the battlefield speedily and identify large units at a glance. Now, I did see a forum post and Age of Empires 4 developers talking about this, saying they had heard these complaints, but it's something that they don't want to change. I've heard rumors that this is down to optimization, but really we don't have proper confirmation of this. It's an interesting decision that they've made, and one that I'm not 100% sure a lot of people are too happy with. But the reality is, most of these are nitpicks at this stage. I didn't really have any issues when it came to bugs. Yes, perhaps optimization could be improved. Even on a 3090, I could tell my frame rate wasn't always at 60, but these things can be changed through patches in the future. The real reason I think it was so successful, though, is because of something I hinted earlier. It's very Age of Empires. You see, the basic mechanics of Age of Empires 4 and the actual framework of the game is almost identical to Age of Empires 2. From starting out to moving through the ages, building up armies, and even the win conditions like capturing relics and building wonders. It goes to the extent where a lot of the soundtrack and the sound design is taken straight from or directly inspired by Age of Empires 2 Age of Kings. And it does actually just feel a bit like a graphically better AoE 2, which might sound bad, but I think that's actually why most people are loving it. I mean, it makes sense, right? One off, if not the most popular game in the franchise, pretty much remade, especially not too long after the definitive edition for Age of Kings. Everyone's in that Age of Empires 2 mood at the moment, and I think Relic knew this. Coming back to such a massive franchise as an outsider developer, the odds were really stacked against them. Yes, okay, they've got the big name, so it will probably sell well anyway, but this also comes with massive expectations. So Relic decided to go for the reboot. Okay, it is called Age of Empires 4, but really, it's just a glorified reboot of the franchise as a whole, which I actually think is the best way to go about bringing old and inviting new players back into the IP. And this is why I'm calling it a basic masterpiece, because it is fantastic, but there's not a ton of new additions. Relic did play it safe, so safe perhaps that there are people out there that I think do want a bit more in it, more in terms of improvements and additions to the gameplay that haven't been in other titles in the franchise. But I do think this decision to secretly reboot the IP has given Relic a cushion of positive feedback to help them so close to the full release. Everything AoE 4 does is fantastic. The gameplay loop feels satisfying and refined, and the more and more feedback that I observed from the community, the more and more of this I saw. There's nothing controversial about this game anymore. Everyone seems to feel like AoE 4 is a solid return to form, and I couldn't agree more. But let me know what you think. Was a reboot to the franchise the right way to go? Bringing out something incredibly playable, yet safe? Or is it maybe too safe for some people? Leave your comments down below. But leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Yet until then, I will see you in the next one.